know that I'm in a room full of people who are expert in the field and know way more than I do. But as a mother, as a wife, as a doctor, as a human, the things that I heard and the messages that I promised to bring back are the ones I'm telling you today. And in these camps, you have almost 1 million people now. They're 80% women and children. It begs the question, what has happened to the men? The flagrant denial of any violation of human rights was proven completely wrong. I'm not sure if many of you would have seen it, but I was on Newsnight very recently because they had uncovered some evidence where for the first time it had been released, people actually talking about killing people that they knew were innocent and burying them in mass graves in Myanmar. I was supposed to be there now, actually. I was supposed to be in Myanmar with an NGO, and I was supposed to be returning tonight. And a few days before travel, the International Development Committee were prohibited from travelling. They weren't given a visa. And the NGO said to me that in anticipation of my coming, the army had been to question the NGO staff, had taken them in for interrogation and had threatened them to the point that it wasn't even safe for myself and my team member to go on this trip. This is happening on our global watch. And the concern to me is, you know, as a British community, like, we pride ourselves, we are good people. We believe in fairness, justice, equality. We want to know what's going on. And the concern is that while people are not being allowed access in terms of NGO staff, while the media are not being allowed in, this genocide is happening and the army are getting away with it. And the real concern for me is about the global message that sends. If in the world people can get away with atrocities like this and know that they are not held to account, where next? Who next? And they are absolutely no different to us. When I was in the camps and talking to these families, these people who had lost everything, they said, we feel completely abandoned, we feel completely left alone. And I promised that I would take their messages and bring them back. And I have done at every point, try to deliver these messages. But we need to ensure that we call for the perpetrators of these heinous crimes to be taken and tried in the International Criminal Court. Nothing less will do. And what is so alarming is that all of these refugees that are currently in Bangladesh, who's opened its heart and its borders, but cannot cope under the strain, has had to strike an agreement with Myanmar that they will send them back. They live under an apartheid system there. They have no proper citizenship. Send them back to their deaths? And if they don't do that, another alternative is an island which is subject to flood risk. 50% of the year it's flooded off the coast of Bangladesh. I could talk a lot more on this subject, but I have a little bit of time left if anyone has any questions, but I would just like to say thank you so much for all that you do, because I know that you are here today gathered in pursuit of democracy and how we can best reach that together. I thank you for your time listening to me today, and I thank you for listening to the messages that I've brought back from the camps. Thank you.
We've got 3 there. Let's go. Let's do all 3, and then we'll tackle.
Sorry. I have just a couple of brief questions for Harvey. From 0 to 10, where would you put the role of the European Union and its insistence on democracy in actually strengthening the AKP versus the military? And the second is, what about Turkish military intelligence? Wasn't it tempted to manipulate elections and kind of go around the system while its own internal systems were being weakened?
Okay, thank you. The gentleman there is, and then to the right.
Khalid Nadeem, South Asia Middle East Forum. Do you think our government here doesn't seem to be giving it such a priority, this issue. I mean, Boris Johnson doesn't seem to talk about it.
We're talking about Myanmar, are we?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it just doesn't seem to be at the top of their list. I mean, it's gone down. I know Brexit's on everyone's, but it's an issue which they need to take a little bit more interest in. And I don't think they're putting any pressure at all on government in Myanmar about the issues which have been raised. And it's been raised by so many people from different sides of the House. And I think it needs a concerted public campaign, I think.
Okay. And this gentleman here.
Duncan Bartlett, the editor of Asian Affairs magazine.
Didn't recognise you, Duncan.
Good to see you, Humphrey. Dr. Brenner said in his presentation about Myanmar that foreign aid sometimes brings problems. That's the phrase that he used. In response to the situation with Rohingya, what should be the foreign aid response to the crisis in Bangladesh?
Let's deal with the Turkey issues first. The EU and military intelligence. One of those.
So, as explained, is that the first question is to the European Union. The European Union had reservations. Remember, we were talking about this is the Obama administration that there is, and this is a time when the Arab Springs, Libya, Syria, everything is kind of blowing up to that part. There is. So it was in Washington, the major decision was that this is the right model for Muslim world that year. But you have to remember at that time period, because we are now where we are now that year. Erdogan at that time period, he went inside Turkey, he has erected a big tent. He had started peace negotiations with the Kurds. There was a ceasefire with PKK. A lot of kind of economic developments going on that there. Turkey was not involved in any foreign adventures at that time period that there is. So both internal and kind of regional and international situation was such where everybody thought that's the best model for not only for Turkey but for the whole Middle East out there. And that Turkey can be a guiding light for everyone that is, because we are at that time period there, so that's why there was a full support from Washington that there on that issue that there. European Union had a strong reservation because of the entry of Turkey into EU that there. And remember, the Erdogan was a very smart move, is to a lot of constitutional reforms which he did, which clipped the wings of Turkish army. The argument was not that, well, we went to Sweden. They said this is what the EU wants that, because to get into the EU, we have to do these constitutional changes to have a civilian supremacy that. So it was a coalition of all these factors that there where he got the free ride that year. It is the problem occurred is after the coup that year. After the coup, when he didn't went only for the army that year, he just kind of right and left. He put the Kurdish parliamentarians in prison, things that there, and that's how kind of things came that part. And the part of the second question is to the Turkish military intelligence now. Now the Turkish army in generally is in so much of control in terms of just with a smooth kind of a simple memorandum and in a conference making a decision that there is. They expected that yes, there is a pushback that there is from the civilian that there is. But they did not have the instruments that there which to manipulate elections to a level where you can, because Erdogan was on a wave that year. And because remember, he came in 2002 because of the worst crisis of economic crisis of Turkey of 2000, 2001 that year. So there was a public kind of that wave is coming that year is where, and I've seen a lot of secularist Turkish who vote for Erdogan. What was their argument? I said, well, but this guy's an Islamist. He's going to bring the headscarves in. I said, no, we know. We have the guardians. The army is there, so let him do all the, wherever he's going to cross the line, the army is going to put him in check. That is. But that's what but the army was losing ground on several fronts so quickly, and they had no international kind of backing that because everybody was backing the Erdogan.
Thank you very much. Now onto the Myanmar issue here. Just to recap, two things. How high should it be on the political overseas agenda? And I've got an added one to that is, does Britain have any influence anymore? And does it have it particularly in Asia, which is no longer our backyard? And there's this issue of foreign aid, and I was very interested in what David said there about the getting rid of the influence of China there must have been a lot of divisions in the military as to whether they wanted to stay with China or not, and how does foreign aid play into all of that?
Lovely, thank you. I'm going to touch on the question about our government and on foreign aid just from my perspective in Bangladesh. So, our government should be ashamed of itself, quite frankly. I returned, even while on the flight back, my team and I were drafting the urgent question that I had to the government. 3 times that week, my urgent question to the government was refused. I had to come up with another strategic way to ambush Boris Johnson over the matter. So I picked a debate the following week where I stood up and I addressed him in the chamber and I said to him, "What are you going to do about this issue? Will you meet with me to discuss it?" He said, quite frankly, he was too busy and I should write him a letter. I then ambushed Mark Field, who is a minister dealing with the area, and I said I would like to meet with him privately. And I met with him in his office, and quite frankly, his answers to my questions were so thoroughly disappointing and showed me that actually I have very little faith in how our government would even approach the issue. He said to me that he loses sleep over it. I said, well, I'm sure that must be difficult for you. I said to him, so what are you going to do about it? On our watch, this is happening. Are you going to look at yourself and be courageous and be the Britain that we are so proud to be a part of, where we are outward looking, where we fight for what's right? And he said, well, it's more complicated than you might understand. I said, really and truly, it seems very clear to me exactly what's going on. He said, well, we have to work in a very subtle, diplomatic way. I said, yeah, but you've been doing that for months. It's not working. On your watch, almost 1 million people have either been killed or are fleeing and have no basic human rights. I said, what about the fact that this is quite clearly a genocide? The government's answer to me was, well, if we call it a genocide, it changes where it stands in humanitarian law. And we all know that ethnic cleansing, which is what Theresa May came out and called it, is not a crime according to humanitarian law, therefore doesn't evoke this cascade within the UN that means that something has to be acted upon and people are tried as a result. So they've been calling it ethnic cleansing and not calling it genocide so that they don't have to act in the way that they would need to if they admitted exactly what was going on. And I said to him in the privacy of his own office, I said, you know exactly what's going on. What are you going to do about it? And he goes, it's a very difficult issue. And I've brought it up many times, again, in the chamber. I'm all over the media wherever possible. But it is right at the bottom of the agenda. It's so disappointing. Boris Johnson didn't even respond to me himself in the letter that I wrote to him. He got someone else to respond to him, to my letter, Mark Field.
Someone else to sign it.
And yeah, so I mean, it's just quite ridiculous. But we don't give up. Putting politics on for a minute, I'm a Labour MP. We don't give up in the Labour Party. We keep fighting. We keep fighting for people. We keep fighting for justice. So that's what we will keep doing as the opposition. And with regards to foreign aid, DFID have been giving a lot of money. The international community have been supporting Bangladesh somewhat. But for me, this isn't about just giving aid to Bangladesh, who clearly can't cope. I mean, 22% live below the poverty line. Giving aid is tantamount to putting a sticking plaster on a gaping gunshot wound while allowing the shooter to roam free. These abhorrent atrocities need to be stopped at source. So our government priding itself on dishing out handouts is, quite frankly, not good enough.
Maybe starting with China first, actually. But working, okay. Maybe starting with China first. There are divisions within the military about this, yeah. But I think that particularly now, Tatmadaw, but also Aung San Suu Kyi actually have understood that China is their last resort in many ways, of like protecting, Myanmar in the United Nations Security Council, for instance, from resolutions, etc. So I think, the idea here is that China, that was never really the there was always a pragmatic relation for Myanmar in many ways, has now kind of proven itself as indispensable again to the Myanmar establishment, which I think is exactly why Myanmar should actually rank much higher also on this country's foreign policy agenda, because it is very much also about the stakes in Asia. I think the US has understood this more clearly. When we look at really DFID's involvement in Myanmar, it's been like lots and lots of money being spent on something called private sector development, which, great, but it doesn't really address any of these political issues at stake at all. And I was actually asked and involved at the time, at the very beginning, as a kind of conflict sensitivity advisor, which is one of those kind of rubber stamping exercises really on something, I had the feeling. And I think besides, in the beginning, from 2011 onwards, there was this massive shift of aid from the Thai border. So there was a huge aid kind of nexus at the Thai border throughout the 90s and 2000s to kind of democratic opposition groups and ethnic opposition groups based there, working on a lot of different issues, humanitarian issues, development, but also in particular political development issues, and political transition issues. And I think that kind of shifting much of this aid from there straight into Myanmar was quite a big mistake actually, and one needs to find ways to kind of re-engage many of these rather sophisticated actors we have been working with before, because at the crux of things are political issues surrounding the constitution, etc. And I think if this isn't solved, we won't see any solving of what happens in Rakhine or elsewhere in the country as well.
Thank you. I'd just like to follow up a couple of questions. If you were in government, if you were sitting on the other side of that fence, isn't it the case that if we threaten, if we withdraw aid and all that, China will just move in? And there is that section of the Burmese establishment and the military that will welcome that. How do you get around that issue of negotiating a change against the genocide that you want, but at the same time keeping that economic and power? And just so we've only got one, I'd like to know what else is going on. There's 22 insurgencies there, and you said this is just one of them. Could you give us a little idea of what other atrocities are taking place that we don't know about?
Thank you, that's a really good question. Personally, I hope to be in government one day. I have every faith that the Labour Party will be, and I would like to be in the position where we can take these decisions. But I know for a fact that we won't be governed by fear. And I know that when it comes down to it, every politician, every government has a duty, a moral duty, to ensure that we call out perpetrators of the most heinous of crimes against humanity, exactly the type of which are occurring now in Myanmar. I know that it's very, very difficult when it comes to negotiating trade agreements and who needs to benefit from whom and how it all works. But look what's going on in Yemen, if I may. Our government and their relationship with Saudi Arabia is meaning that on our watch, the very worst is happening. And I would be proud to be part of a Labour government that would put morality, fairness, equality and justice before everything else.
Like I was saying in the talk already, I think we have to put things into perspective, and what we're seeing, for instance, in the north of the country, there's a lot of clearing operations going on, clearing operations particularly along strategic infrastructure projects, like the Shui gas and oil pipeline, bringing gas and oil from the Andaman Sea to China, or along for instance, mining sites, etc. At the moment, there's sort of fighting going on in the Tanai region, for instance. But even in areas where you have ceasefires, and this is important now, even in areas where you have ceasefires with some of these ethnic armed groups, as for instance in eastern Myanmar, we see lots of fighting going on at the very moment in a place called Mutro, where again actually there is no proper ceasefire code of conduct, and ceasefires have been used very much to expand military operations in these very areas, which leads to more fighting. So ceasefires in and of themselves have also not produced any result there. And the last point I want to mention, I think, before everybody has a bit of a break, one very worrying dynamic that I've been witnessing over the last 3 years now is that the relations also between different minority groups have been deteriorating. We're often seeing kind of ethnic minorities versus the government versus the Myanmar army, for instance, but actually the relations between different groups in the north of the country, Shani and Kachin, for instance, Taong and Shan and Wa, for instance, they've been really deteriorating to extents that we've seen like fighting between ethnic armed groups, that we've seen lots of vigilante militias propping up to protect their communities vis-a-vis each other. And these dynamics very much have to do with this long-standing sort of attempt of dividing and ruling the country that is very much what the Myanmar army is doing to kind of not bring stability, but bring controllability for itself to these very areas. And that's something I think which blow up in the next 5 to 10 years to a much larger extent. It needs to be watched really again.
The three speakers we've got are all very well versed in that. Professor Pervez Hoodboy, the distinguished professor from the Foreman College, is going to be talking about the army versus democracy in Pakistan, and if ever there's an unresolved situation there, that is certainly one of them. Mara MacDonald, who has written some couple of excellent books on this issue, is going to talk about the power of the military generally in Pakistan and South Asia, and tell us a little bit about that, how that tapestry works. And then we're going to move finally, and this is particularly what fascinates me, to Dr. Aisha Siddiqa, who's a military scientist and author, and looking at Pakistan and Egypt. And I think this is fascinating because we all remember what happened in Tahrir Square and that euphoria, naive euphoria from the Western democracies, and David Cameron walking through saying what a wonderful situation this was, and now you probably have one of the newest embryonic military dictatorships, brutal, that locking up my colleagues and locked up one of my friends for more than a year, and randomly or forensically killing people that they think are their enemies. So first of all, we would go to Professor Hoodboy on the army versus democracy in Pakistan.
There are two items in today's newspapers in Pakistan that are on the front page, and these underscore the privileged position or the dominant position of the Pakistan military in the political structure. The first is that members of the outgoing Senate have noted that the Nuclear Command Authority Act, which was passed by Parliament in 2010, was never discussed and never revealed to the Parliament. Members of the Senate had requested that there be a presentation of the outlines, at least, of the command and control of nuclear weapons. The Ministry of Defense in principle had agreed and then asked for a in-camera session. But now that Senate is gone and the outlines of the command and control structure were never revealed. Now, of course, that is not terribly surprising because the Pakistan Army has always said that matters of national security can be trusted only to those who are worthy of the trust.